Alright guys, so we're officially going to start talking about biology. So first off, let's sort of break that word down, right? So what does biology actually mean? And if we break apart that word into its prefix and suffix, hopefully we know by this point that bio means life, ology means the study of, and so we're really looking at the study of life, what it is, the processes that go into it, the structures that make it up, and how this all fits together and works. The purpose of this particular section really is to kind of give you a big, broad overview of how we organize biology, what are the major structures that go into studying biology, major processes, and really this is going to set the stage for the rest of the school year, and all of these topics that we kind of gloss over here, we're going to spend a lot more time talking about as the year progresses. So, biology is the study of living things, and we're going to try and kind of beef up our vocabulary, get away from using that term living thing, and instead talk about them as organisms. So, this can include botany, zoology, microbiology, ecology, genetics, forensics, anatomy. Biology really, just like chemistry or physics, are these big, broad, overarching terms for these fields of study, and most people, most scientists within those fields aren't just a biologist. They're going to specialize much more than to just study biology in general. So a botanist might study plants. Zoology is somebody, or a zoologist is somebody who studies animals. Microbiology studies things like viruses and fungus and bacteria. And even within those particular more narrow bands of this field are even more specific specialties, but they all encompass studying living things. So if I'm going to study biology, I need to understand that living things really do range in size. And so we can talk about studying life at a microscopic scale, meaning I need something like a microscope to be able to see them, so they're very tiny, very small, and even things like viruses are part of biological studies, and I can't even see them with a microscope, they're so small. All the way up to more macroscopic or larger scale levels of the entire organism, or I can go bigger and talk things like ecosystems or even the entire biosphere, the entire Earth as a whole. And so my study of biology really can range depending on what my specialty is, what my question for a particular experiment is. So really there's a huge range at which biology can be studied. So some biologist questions may be these big macroscopic level questions where I'm studying the entire globe as a whole and I need things like satellites to give me data from Earth, all the way to the opposite extreme where I'm looking at really powerful microscopes and looking at the most smallest particles of living organisms like bacteria or viruses, in which case I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum, or anywhere in between.
So as biologists, if we're studying living things, we need to have a set of criteria to define what a living thing actually means. So when we look at this list of characteristics of living things that we're going to go over here in just a moment, in order for something to be considered alive or once alive, it had to have met all of these next set of criteria. So let's take a look and see what those characteristics are. So first and foremost, a living thing must be made up of at least a single cell. So cells we're talking about here could either be unicellular organisms, meaning that they only have a single cell, or they are multicellular organisms, and so they have lots of cells that make them up. But a cell, by definition, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is the smallest unit of structure and function of a living thing. So while cells have their own subcomponents, meaning they're smaller pieces to them, those smaller pieces inside a cell no longer are capable of maintaining all of the characteristics of life that we're going to talk about here today. So cells are the smallest unit of a living thing, and they're going to be able to include all of the other characteristics we're going to talk about. So in order to be a living thing, you also have to be able to obtain and use energy. Most of you probably think the first thing that comes to your mind, what do you get for energy? You eat food. We'll talk about this idea of metabolism and how your body takes that food, breaks it down, converts it into energy that your cells can actually use to do things. But as a living thing, you have to have that ability to have that metabolism in one shape or form. So you have to be able to obtain energy from somewhere and then use it to do something in your cells. You also have to be able to grow and develop. And those terms, as we get through some more of these notes, we'll see that those terms do actually mean something a little bit different. When we talk about growing, right, you're actually adding more cells, or you're expanding your size of your cell. Where developing is more about how those cells are being utilized, or how they're functioning. So when we talk about something like growing, right, you become a baby to a toddler to an elementary school student, you're growing, you're getting bigger. But probably most of you have or are currently going through puberty, and that's more development. So we're changing the way that your body looks and the way it functions, by turning on and off different chemicals in your body so that those different parts now work in a different way. And so that's what we're talking about there as far as growth versus development. We also have to have the capacity to change as an entire type of organism, as an entire species. So that's where that idea of being able to evolve comes in. So organisms have to be able to adapt and change to their surroundings as an entire species over time as those environments change. And that's what we mean by evolution. And we'll go into more detail on that later this year as well. As a living thing, you also have to be able to respond to your surroundings. So having external stimuli, things like changes in temperature, changes in light, changes in sound, those are all things that your body is capable of responding to because you are a living thing. So if you start cranking up the temperature in the house, right, you start sweating. If you go out in the middle of winter, you're going to start to shiver, right? You're responding to those changes in your environmental temperature. If any of you have parents or guardians who maybe flip the lights on first thing in the morning to try and help wake you up, and you kind of like bury yourself in the covers, right? Your body is responding to that change in stimuli, that light stimulus. Your eyes dilate or constrict, right? The little black parts, the pupils inside your eyes, change their size to try and accommodate the different amounts of light that come in. We also have to be able to maintain homeostasis, and that kind of cycles back to that idea of responding to stimuli. So how does your body maintain these same internal conditions? That's what homeostasis means. Homeo literally translates to same, and if I take that suffix stasis, that also translates to same. And so we're talking about these same set of internal conditions. So something like your body temperature, right? As humans, we are able to internally regulate that body temperature somewhere around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So by sweating or shivering, your body is trying to maintain that 98.6 set point temperature to maintain your homeostasis because that's where your body works. We start messing with that homeostasis and say you've got a fever or you have hypothermia, so you're really, really cold. That starts throwing your body out of its homeostasis. And we have a lot of systems then that start going haywire on us because we're not maintaining those set of internal conditions. We also have to be able to reproduce, at least as a species, right? So at least the capacity to reproduce, whether or not every individual organism or individual living thing within that population, within that species, decides to reproduce or has the capacity to reproduce. Maybe, maybe not, but as a whole, that organism, those types of organisms have to have the ability to reproduce, create offspring, so that they can pass on genetic information, which is how the evolution comes up. Our final characteristic is being based on a universal genetic code. So we're talking about molecules like DNA and RNA having a set of very specific instructions that those cells are able to follow in order to determine how they look and how they function. And that kind of ties back then to that idea of being able to reproduce, because by creating that next generation, you need to have a specific set of instructions to be able to tell one generation of lions what to look like so that the next generation looks and functions very much the same way.